NGOs, non-governmental organizations, they can implement laws that implement policies that you have established, but they cannot enforce them. For example, when a law is broken, they're not enforcement agencies. They can help to support families that are in dire need, but only to an extent. So what will continue to happen is that you'll continue to have people that are going to continue to fall through the cracks because NGOs and family members and faith organizations do not have the ability to really sustain people the way that government help can do.
Now, across Africa, communities are facing a rising social crisis from mental health struggles, family breakdown, youth vulnerability, gender-based violence, addiction, and displacements to deepening urban poverty. With over 400 million Africans living in extreme poverty and 40% of the world's children projected to live on the continent by 2050. Now, joining us to unpack this robust topic is Dr. Hero Onyesle. I hope I got that name correct. Founder and Director, Social Work Program, University of Delaware, former Assistant Dean for Program Development and Community Engagement at Delphi University, Administrator, Educator, Social Worker, Writer. So glad to have you on Just Africa.
It is my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so let's start off. Africa has very few social workers for its population. What does this mean for families and communities?
Well, the fact that that's important actually is really indicated by the title that you gave this conversation that we're going to be having. I believe that you used the word emergency in describing the state of social work in Africa. And what that shortage means is actually something that cannot just be described in a few words. It can actually take us a whole day to discuss this or even more. But just briefly, because I am respectful of the little amount of time that we have, when you have that significant shortage of social work or social workers in a community or in a country or in this case a continent, you actually have less protection for children. Therefore, incidents of abuse and neglect, exploitation, which are common in many societies around the world, really just tend to take root. So in Africa, for example, because you have that shortage of social workers, which is so significant, it becomes very difficult to have sufficient protection for children, because you are leaving the protection of children to their parents and to family members who are themselves very stretched because of the circumstances of the country. So there is abuse, there is neglect, there are exploitation risks which rise in situations like that, and there are no social workers to monitor and offer the kinds of protection that are needed. Protection for the children and support for the parents and family members to be able to provide adequate support for those children. There is also limited support when there is crisis. The first point that I was making was that when you have that significant shortage of social workers, there is less protection for children and families. And children who suffer abuse and neglect and significant risks also rise, risks of exploitation and other things that are very prevalent around the world. And also there's limited support for children and families, for everyone, when there is crisis. And we know that Africa is actually prone to a lot of crises, natural disasters, economic issues, and when family members become ill, who are caregivers for other members of a family, and there are no safety nets to help protect them and support them during those times of crisis. In societies where social work is really established as a profession, It is the social workers who then step up and fill the gap and help those families get through the crisis states that they are facing, whether it's violence or the loss of jobs or when people become ill and die who are caregivers. And also there is neglected mental health needs. It is one of caring for mental health, making sure that treatment is provided, that assessment is done, and also case management services are provided for people who experience mental health challenges. Those all fall within the responsibilities of social workers. So when a society is lacking in social workers as we have in Africa, those mental health needs are really neglected, and people who face trauma, who have significant losses and face grief situations, adolescents, children who are suffering from poverty and other mental health needs, that's neglected. And then what you have is an over-reliance on what we call informal networks, that is, family members and friends who are caregivers. If you think of the fact that African countries generally also are facing significant economic crisis, you also understand that those informal caregivers are not able to provide all of the financial needs, the caregiving needs, because they themselves are suffering financially. So when you over-rely on those informal networks, you throw that society even down into further crisis, and also you just extend inequalities and regional disparities, because what tends to happen, and you have that even in Nigeria with its wealth, social workers, because there aren't enough social workers, you find that most of the social workers that actually exist in the urban areas. And so they are not enough, first of all, even to care for the needs of those urban areas. And then you ask yourself, who is caring for the needs of the local regions? So those regional disparities exist. And in the long term, because social workers actually come not at a point of need, but social workers also understand that the point of need is when the need begins to arise, not when it has already been not when the need has already established, such that it becomes difficult to really address them. So social workers really come in at the beginning point. Of course, they can come in the middle and also in the end, but it's always best when they come in the beginning. So when that doesn't happen, the economic costs for that society are even higher, because any problem that's not addressed in the beginning just has it faces the danger of just increasing, it metamorphoses, so that at the point when the country or the society realizes that it's time to address that need, the costs just become much higher. So those are really the points that one needs to make when we consider the consequences of having such low numbers of social workers across Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doctor. Many African countries still consider the profession of being a social worker is still undervalued in Africa. Why is it so?
Oh, it is so for several reasons. Number one, because there is a colonial legacy. I remember when I was an undergraduate decades ago, one of my history professors said, although colonialism is done in Nigeria, where I grew up, said, although we no longer have colonialism, the grandchildren, he said, of imperialism are still with us. So there is still that mentality in across Africa, where the colonial legacy that was left is such that it has created a mismatch between Western social work models and the local realities. So what has happened is that even in parts of Africa where there is a tendency to speak about social work, the roots of social work in Africa still really reside in those Western concepts of what social work is. So it's not really built to address the local needs. So when I'm hearing social workers in Africa talk about DEI, for example, which is really an American concept, it just reminds me of the fact that there needs to be that serious connection with the African roots. That's one. But another reason why it's devalued is because of the strong informal networks that have historically been part of the African culture, where there has always been a reliance on the family, not just as a biological unit, but also an economic unit. But what has happened is that the African countries still don't realize or really don't want to accept, because there is a significant amount of denial over the fact that the African family is no longer as strong as it used to be and cannot really continue to withhold or withstand the challenges that families face. And so there is also poverty, there are resource constraints, and which really force these on the social work profession being undervalued. But there is also a lack of understanding of what social work is.
Exactly.
And then also, right, and there's a complete lack of understanding. And so there's also the religious piece, and we need to also talk about that, where people are told, if you have a problem, don't worry, God will take care of that. It is not that God will not take care of it, but God uses people. And I tell you that social work is actually, if social work is not doing the Lord's work, then I'm not sure what is, because God uses people to take care of other people. And social workers really step into that role. In 1964, here in the United States, the government of Lyndon B. Johnson, president, he declared what he called a war on poverty. And in that war of poverty, guess what happened? Social workers were considered as the foot soldiers to make sure that they also focused on helping, not only to drive the policy, but to drive it such that it will lead to the reduction of poverty across the United States. And that continues to be one of the main goals of the social work profession. So it is that all of these factors are the reasons why we continue to undervalue social work in Nigeria, well, in Africa, but also there are weak institutional supports for the profession, because the people at the top of government in Africa, very often, I think we have to acknowledge this, because they're not really thinking so much of the ordinary person. And social work at its very basic level of understanding lives to support the ordinary person. And because those people at the top are not considering the ordinary person in terms of their policy formulation and implementation, one of the consequences for that is that they have not built the institutions that will support the social work profession the way that it should.
All right, thank you very much. So, in further to what you just said, why should African governments treat social work as a key part of national development?
Oh, well, they need to think and consider social work as a big part of national development for multiple reasons. Number one, if you are going to wait until problems fester and get to the point where you can no longer address them, it's a higher cost for government. And one of the things, government also exists to protect its citizens. That's really the real role of government. Every government is to protect its citizens. And if you're going to protect your citizens, then it's important to think of the people who really are at the top of protection when you're thinking of the regular people in your society. And social workers really live at that top level of protection. So it's important to build social work into the development of your country. And it's also, in addition to those two reasons, also consider this fact. If you are government, regardless of how we conceive of government, there are people at the basic level, there are people in the rural areas who you cannot reach. And the only way to understand what they are dealing with, the challenges that they have at that level, is to have people who interact with them on a daily basis. And the people who tend to interact with people at that basic level on a daily basis, very often teachers, social workers, and faith leaders. And so you need to involve all of those in policy development as you consider national development. But also consider the fact that in every society, there are vulnerable people in every society, whether they live in the cities or they live in the rural areas. There are vulnerable people. And those vulnerable people very often are in touch with social workers. And so it is important, if you are interested in building your society, to build it in such a way that the people who know where the vulnerable people are those who you want to include in your national development. Because really, a society should never be judged by the amount of wealth that it has. A society should be judged by the way it takes care of its people. And so if you are going to be a government that is known for taking good care of its people, then it's important to understand those people who really know where the vulnerable people are, deal with the vulnerable people, but also you want to be able to promote social protection in your society. That is one of the ways that a government will be known. Because promoting social protection will reduce long-term socioeconomic crisis. It's just a fact that if you make sure that young people, when they are graduating from high school, have jobs to go to or have colleges to go to or universities to go to, where they don't have to suffer so much to pay through their noses. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that social workers can help you build and help people take care of. And if you are going to have young people that you are training for the future of your country, it is important to build social work into that those national protection development programs. And that means that you build social protections in the long term. And also, community resilience is one of the things that social workers work on to make sure that communities are able to self-sustain. Because social workers not only work with individuals and families, they also work with groups and with communities to make sure that they become resilient units, resilient forces that can self-sustain and sustain the society. And social workers also help to support the implementation of laws. I just talked about 1964 with the war on poverty, and how social workers became the driving force, these foot soldiers for that. I can talk about that over and over in U.S. history. When President Obama came up with the Affordable Care Act, which is, our main healthcare insurance in this country, what did he do? When it was signed into law, when he gave his State of the Union speech right after it was signed into law, he specifically thanked social workers for their role in helping to drive the Affordable Care Act. And when President Bush came up with the Medicare Part D, what happened? It was social workers who were going to the homes of the elderly people to help them register for that program, to make sure that they understood that policy and help them register for it. Because without social workers, too many people in societies get shafted. In other words, they get lost, especially in societies like the African societies where there are no safety nets. And when I talk about safety nets, I'm talking about things like Social Security, a strong and efficient pension systems, childcare policies that the government funds and supports, educational policies that make sure that education is not too expensive for children, but also jobs for people to go to after they graduate from college, so that they can actually make income to sustain themselves. Because when you don't do that, it becomes costly for the government or for the country in the long term. So these are some of the things that social workers help with. And it just makes perfect sense to build social work and make room for social workers in the policies that every country develops to make sure that their countries are strong and continue to be vibrant.
All right, thank you very much, Doctor. Now, can you share a US model or a system that African countries can adapt, especially in the ministries of social welfare, that can help social welfare communities, individuals that can help them do better in their services?
Oh, wow. There are many policies, but you have heard me talk about the safety nets. And so the safety nets, and I said, will be things like Social Security, very strong pension systems. These are things that are very present in the United States. And I don't know how much you've read about me, but one of my published research studies was on the financial well-being of older people in Nigeria. And I'll tell you that when I was doing that study, I went to Nigeria. One of the things that I did was interview a lot of older Nigerians who were retirees. And I cannot tell you how moved I was to see how I just was so, it became emotional in many cases to see how people who had worked so hard to build and lift the country were now suffering. And pension systems that a pension system that's is good that it exists. It is very good that it exists, and I very much understand that a pension system was not built to help retirees maintain sustenance and survive through the month. I completely understand that. But when you have a pension system and you have someone who worked for 30 years and now has a pension income that's not even enough to pay for their medications for a month, and they have to choose between their medications and food, that is really not great. So it is important to have, as we do have here, we have a social security system that's tiered. It's multi-layered depending on your circumstances. We also have medical systems that really provide for the care of people, whether it's pregnant women, whether it's children, whether it's older people. So the policies that African countries can really adopt are those policies that invest significantly in building and sustaining a social service system, which we have here. And so that's, again, retirement, training, fair compensation for people. That's a policy that supports the social welfare system. And rural development is actually a policy. These are policies that exist here so that you don't have to live in the city to have a well-paying job. You don't have to live in the city to have 24/7 electricity. You don't have to live in the city to have adequate water supply. So it is also a policy. Another policy that I think that African countries can learn from is one that institutionalizes social work education, such that all across the country, universities offer social work programs. Not every university, but you are not going to go to many towns. You're not going to go to counties that don't have social work programs. They do have that. That's a policy. And another policy is one that establishes regulatory programs or regulatory policies that guide the standards of social work practice, and also policies that integrate social work planning with other sectors, and healthcare policies. These are all social welfare policies, making sure that people get benefit of adequate healthcare that they need and deserve, that makes healthcare right for people. And so the policies that prioritize resources, not only in urban centers. I spoke before about how what pertains in Africa is a system where even where you have social workers, they're mostly concentrated in the cities. It's not so here. It should be a system, there should be a policy that we have here that ensures that social workers are supported to live in rural areas as well. But also, and this is a very big one, when you go to social work school in the United States, in most of the states in the United States, if you are a social worker and you took loans to pay for your education, and you work in rural areas or work in a nonprofit organization that supports poor people, your student loan is forgiven after a few years. And so that's a very big policy that, because if you're looking at education and thinking in terms of the cost benefit analysis, you understand that if you support social workers, if you support healthcare workers to go through and pay for the education, and then they begin to work, you know that in the long run, it's, in terms of the cost benefit analysis, it's more beneficial to society in the long run. And so these are some of the policies that I think that African countries can benefit from. Because it's really, really important that we are having this conversation. And one of the things that I think can happen is that as we continue to have conversations like this, perhaps people will listen and make sure that the things that we're talking about really come to pass in Africa. I know that it will take time, but that's a very good question that you just asked. And understand, I completely understand that someone will say, here in Africa, we don't have enough money to be able to pay for policies like that to be implemented. But they don't cost a lot of money, and that's the reality. They don't really cost a lot of money. If I think of the amount of money that Nigerian, for example, senators earn, and also the cars that they drive, I go to Nigeria, I see the so-called official cars that they drive. And I just wonder why they need those when people are suffering. And, and that's how you think as a social worker. Maybe the amount of money, I don't know how much those SUVs cost in Nigeria, the amount of money that you're using, that you're spending to buy these cars can go to pay for the education of people who will, in return, take care of people. And also really just help to support food, the challenges of food insecurity in Nigeria or in Africa generally.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Ohiro. Now, if you look at Nigeria and even parts of Africa,
Sure.
social work, social services is left mainly to the hands of NGOs and religious societies or religious groups. Why is this so? Is there any risk that comes with depending on only NGOs and religious groups for social support?
There are significant risks to that because, first of all, NGOs need money to run. So what happens when the NGO runs out of money? And that's a big risk when you leave individuals to NGOs and faith organizations. So what happens? And also it's a very big risk. And although the NGOs, when they take care of people and they provide social services, they do a great deal of job, but understand what also happens. That a lot of NGOs who are very well-meaning and do the kind of work that they do also do not have enough money to take care of their own staff. So they don't pay their staff enough money to live successfully. So that's another risk. And thirdly, when you think of faith leaders, people should be able to choose and practice their religions. But what happens is when you leave social services at the hands of religious organizations, one of the things that happen is that they only take care of people who practice their religion. That is not what you want. You want organizations that will take care of everybody. So NGOs and faith organizations should exist and in the social service realm to support what the government is providing, not to be the sole providers of social services. And when you make them social service, and also understand that non-profit organizations, NGOs, non-governmental organizations can implement laws that implement policies that you have established, but they cannot enforce them. For example, when a law is broken, they're not enforcement agencies. They can help to support families that are in dire need, but only to an extent. So what will continue to happen is that you'll continue to have people that are going to continue to fall through the cracks because NGOs and family members and faith organizations do not have the ability to really sustain people the way that government help can do. And so you think about the last question that I just answered. How many NGOs are going to be able to provide cash and income support, which is a policy that we have in the United States? Cash and income support to older people, cash and income support to retirees, cash and income support to people who are poor. And how many NGOs are going to be able to do that? How many NGOs are going to be able to support all of the vulnerable children in African societies? And how many NGOs are going to be able to provide and pay for healthcare? And how many NGOs are going to be able to strengthen their communities? And, you know, in the United States, we also have means-tested programs where, depending on the amount of income that you have, you will be entitled to some services. And that's a model in the United States that can actually be translated to African countries. Again, as I said, these things don't cost as much money as they may imply. It just takes prioritization of thought and prioritization of processes. And which also means that if you're going to prioritize those processes and prioritize your thoughts, at the top of those priorities should be the human beings, the citizens of the society. And so these are some of the things. And so when you leave, these are things that NGOs can't really do. And so it is really risky to leave it as it currently is, to continue to be in the hands of NGOs and also in the hands of faith organizations.
All right.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I know my co-host want to round out due to time factor, but I want us to tell us about this book, When Loving Brings Pain. That's one of your most popular books.
It is indeed. And so When Loving Brings Pain is a book that really focuses on the challenges that occur in relationships, not only in marriage relationships, but romantic relationships. People go into romantic relationships because of love, however we define love. But what that book actually talks about is the fact that even love can be painful, because think about it. We expect that when we are in love, somebody is going to love us equally. And so the question then becomes, can love always or ever be 50-50? But then how do you quantify that? But at the bottom, at the crux of relationships, which is what as I described in that book, is that there are two things very often. I have been a psychotherapist for over 30 years. I've been a licensed psychotherapist in the United States for actually exactly 32 years. And I do, a lot of my clients are also couples. And one of the things that I've found through years of practice, which I discussed in that book, is that this is especially for women, because women can be very tolerant and very patient. But when circumstances come to fall and become really big to the point where they challenge relationships so significantly, very often it is because at that point of blow up, it is very often because a lot has been simmering in the background for a very long time. And what I argued in that book is that two of the reasons why many relationships get challenged to that point is because of that pain that is very often caused by multiple factors, including anger, and which has simmered over the years. So when loving brings pain really means, I can love you to the point where it becomes painful, where it becomes really unbearable, very difficult to continue to deal with the pain that the relationship is causing. Very often due to anger and due to emotional pain. Because in the United States, for example, there is this old saying that sticks may break my bone, but words may not break my words can never hurt me. But that's not true when it comes to marriage. Very often, there are communication issues. and I see this all the time in the relationships that I work on. There are communication issues, and those communication issues can actually break a person emotionally. And it can really just build and build and build until a point here the person cracks. There are anger issues that build and build and build until that person cracks. And I'll tell you this, that one of the things, I don't know if you saw this on my website, but something that I am doing now is I am training people in Nigeria to practice, to develop psychotherapy skills. And so I just recently started it about a month ago, and now we're really in the second module. So there are a lot of people who registered for this course through my Psychotherapy Institute. And so we meet every Saturday, and I give them this training. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about too is anger management and how to work with people through and who are dealing with anger management. Understand this, and that all of us who come into relationships bring into relationships the baggage that we have brought from our lives up until that point. And sometimes that baggage is really a product of trauma. And so when people come into relationships who have been traumatized and never worked through that trauma, then there are things that happen. They come in already traumatized, and experiences in a marriage or in that relationship can really re-traumatize them. And when people are traumatized over and over again, perhaps because the partner in relationship is yelling at them, or using words that are derogatory in addressing them, which remind them of the traumatic experiences that they had when they were growing up or before they got into this relationship, then there is this need to be self-protective and not to share, not to communicate more because they don't know what a partner is going to do or say in response to what they're trying to say or what they're trying to do in this relationship. So there are many factors, and we can have this discussion about when loving brings pain. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Ohiro Oniesele, for your insight, and thank you very much for joining us on Just Africa.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. I hope we do this again.